in that context, we may ask ourselves, how are we to live our lives? I agree with Aristotle that the ultimate good is happiness. Now, that's not to be taken as in a crude hedonistic sense that we should sort of it's just, what do you say, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I think that's a mistaken view of happiness. But the flip side of that, of course, is that there is one thing that is really terrible, and that is suffering. The Buddhists were big on that, if you know Buddhism. And so I think that if we're going to, in a very few minutes, talk about the good and the bad in life, good is happiness, bad is suffering. However, if something is good, like happiness, it's not just good for me, it's good for every creature capable of happiness. The same thing is true of suffering. And so to put things very briefly, I think that what we ought to do is we ought to increase the happiness for all creatures, all living creatures, not just those that we like, that we hang out with, not just our fellow humans, but all creatures capable of happiness and suffering. Now, of course, it's all very easy to have these sort of lofty ideals, you know. And so the question is, how do we implement that on the ground? And there, I'd like to turn to the sort of ancient Greek practices that you see in Stoicism, where you have a daily practice that they, in fact, called meditation. Some of you might have read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, or have read some of Seneca. And the idea here is that you engage in a daily practice where you reflect upon your life, you reflect on what you think the fundamental values are, and how you have managed to implement those values in your life during that day. Just in your interactions with other people, in your emotional reactions. And in that way, I think you can actually achieve real change. But I think that the idea that the Stoics had of a daily practice, not just a one-off decision where you think, okay, I got to do better, when you feel really bad about having done something, that is not really the way to go. One of the things that I also think that the Stoics had right was that they thought one of the important things is a therapy of desire, a therapy of emotions. So we don't get stuck in a cycle of action and reaction. So we get angry and we lash out and we cause more suffering. A lot of times we can stop out and reflect on how we're feeling, whether that actually reflects reality. For instance, somebody like Seneca wrote, I think, a wonderful piece on anger that I highly recommend for anybody to read. Lastly, I do, of course, as a philosopher, I'm big time into truth and questioning and seeing if we can look at things a different way, whether we can explore different ways of living that may be better for everybody considered. So that is, I think, is also a good thing to include in our daily practice. Thank you.